My recording. Sorry, just resuming my recording. So I find these two quite hard to separate. Therefore, I often use them co-jointly here. So if I sort of say the word, yeah, it means the same thing throughout my presentation. So I'm not sure how many of you will have seen this definition, but this comes from one of the real founders of the mindfulness movement, John Kabat-Zinn. And he was a professor in medicine in New England, I think somewhere like Boston. And he used mindfulness with patients that were suffering from chronic pain. And he'd come through that era of the 60s and 70s as a young man, where he'd been involved with meditation and yoga and kind of that sort of the hippie sphere. And he began to see real benefits by using it with his patients in a chronic pain clinic that he ran. And so his definition is one that I often use, which is that awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And those three aspects are kind of what makes it up. Really, that non-judgmentally is maybe the trickiest thing to get your head around, because your mind wants to take over and take you down lots of different paths. And so very non-judgmentally, you bring yourself back continually at the beginning to that present moment until you get very practiced at being in that present moment. So these are just some of the benefits that I have found that you will get from practicing meditation or mindfulness. It makes us a lot less reactive. You know, if you are able to calm that sympathetic nervous system down in your body, then the byproduct is that you're going to be a lot less reactive to situations. It also gives us more choices and options in working with our life. So basically it opens up those avenues that perhaps you hadn't seen before, because you're able to actually calm yourself down and give yourself that clarity that your brain needs. It actually also prevents relapses of depression, which is amazing, and reduces clinical depression, anxiety, anger, and rumination, and also enhances cognitive flexibility and attention. And I'm sure we could all do with a lot of that at the moment. I know that I'm finding my attention span is particularly very short at the moment. So the mindfulness-based therapies are readily accepted as working well to actually alleviate distress and stress disorders. So it's kind of important, if you are inclined to get yourself quite stressed, that actually accessing these mindfulness-based therapies will help you a great deal. So now we get into the little bit of the science bit, which is one of my loves. And I've put there a picture of a brain, a pretty simplified one. But what you'll see there in the middle is a little, like, it looks like a pea, but it's a purple pea, thing called the amygdala. And this is very, very close to the hippocampus. And predominantly stress begins in the brain, and it begins in that little part called the amygdala, which is the emotional processing center of the brain. And this sends off signals to the hypothalamus, which is behind it there in the head, which is a bit like the command center. And this alerts your system to some danger via the autonomic nervous system. And then we get the hormone adrenaline, released from the adrenal glands into the bloodstream and triggered by the sympathetic nervous system, and which enables your body to actually go into that fight or flight mode. So the sympathetic nervous system is our fight, flight, or freeze part of our nervous system. You get an increase in your heart rate so that more blood can get pumped to your lungs, around your lungs and your other organs. Your blood pressure rises, and glucose is released as an immediate energy source. And when we don't use that glucose, it actually gets laid down as fat, which is not great. So to summarize, you're almost getting a chain reaction, which fires up and ends with adrenaline and cortisol being released for the adrenal gland, which is above the kidneys. And those chemicals can actually stay in your system for a few hours until eventually the system resets itself if the stresses go away. However, in our busy lives, and especially during times like lockdown, we can often be just getting over one stress and then another one comes along, and continually firing up those chain reactions can be very tiring. It's like we're living life on high alert without really being aware of it and without any time to reset the system. The stress response obviously enables our body to be ready to deal with threat, and it really exists to protect you, but it was never ever designed to be fired up 24/7 or always on. When we can pause and assess the situation to know that we are not really under any immediate threat, or to learn to manage it, then it's possible to access the autonomic response and dampen down the stress response, or move ourselves into what I call next is our logical brain. So we have in the front, and you would have seen in that brain picture back there, we have the prefrontal cortex, which is this part here, right here, the green part. And that is our logical brain. So this is where we get our good thinking happening, and it's run by our parasympathetic nervous system. So I call that my working or creative brain. And so obviously, if we're switching off that reptilian or the primitive brain, then we're able to actually think a lot more logically from our prefrontal cortex. So calming our sympathetic nervous system helps us to then be able to think more clearly and have the option of a healthy decision rather than an unhealthy one. And when anxiety or conflict are present, our mind often goes quickly to, are you against me or with me? So being present allows us to slow down our heart rate and actually slow down our physiological response to then be able to access that logical part of our brain, which is a really important skill. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know, but our brain really loves to take the easy way out. So the brain remembers stressful situations that we may have had in the past, and it will search for how it reacted in the past to these similar situations. And our brains are a bit like those problem-solving machines, which every now and again need a good reboot. But like a computer, if it's not working, we tend to switch it off at the wall. Well, the brain's a bit the same. You know, sometimes it actually needs a good switch off as well to get it going again. So how does it help? Mindfulness of the body here is any experience that we have rooted in the body. Contacting that experience will really help us feel more grounded, aware, and alive. A state of mind that expresses itself as a felt sense. It's also a way to know ourselves. So who are we? And we are partly whatever is going on in our bodies. And so by doing this whole reconnecting into our bodies, you become a lot more aware of that mind-body connection. And when you don't have that, you might see signs of that dissociation from our body, which we call a mind-body split. And this is often led by, or signs of it are obsessive thinking, judgmental thinking or behavior, distracting, numbing behaviors. And they're things like, scrolling through your social media, drinking alcohol, basically zoning out. Or lastly, which I'm quite good at times, is that speeding or rushing around. So I'm just going to pause this for a minute. Stop the share. Okay. So yeah, but our mind is always going to come up with barriers. And as you alluded to, there's many of them. And I feel like Briar alluded to one of the most common ones, which is time. And what we tend to do is we almost sabotage ourselves by taking that extra sleep in the mornings when we could be getting up and going for our walk, or we tend to just buy into that easy factor quite quickly. Now there is a little problem with that, because you're not treating yourself how you really want to treat yourself. Now, I'm working with a coach at the moment, and she says that we set ourselves rules and we live by those rules. And we wrote those out at the beginning of our coaching time together. And those rules are what I stick to, every day. And I find that once you've written them out and you're very clear about, this is what I'm going to do today, or this is what my 5 days a week, this is what I do, then there's a lot less resistance in your brain. So there's a lot of work that coaches especially do about overcoming those thoughts and those resistances within your brain. Okay, so there's really, really simple ways to get into any meditation or mindfulness practice. And these are the most simple ways to actually calm down your nervous system and to switch you from your sympathetic nervous system into your parasympathetic nervous system. So breathing, and simply, we were born to breathe. The first thing we do when we are born is that we take a breath. And the last thing that we do on this earth is we have our last breath. And so breathing is so cool because it connects that ventral vagus nerve, which is one of our cranial nerves, and it is the prime driver of our parasympathetic nervous system. So basically, it switches on your working and creative brain. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about was balance breathing. And this is something that I did a little bit of learning about in a workshop I was in August. And balance breathing actually comes from the field of embraining. And it's a process of trying to get your breathing to be the same length as you go in and out. And so it's basically important that you breathe in and out your nose, because that's the way that balanced breathing works. So you breathe in and out your nose ideally, and you place one hand on your lower belly and the other hand on your chest. And you can have a little go with it now while I'm talking. And you become aware of your breath in the first instance. You become aware of its speed, its depth, the movement it creates in your body, in your ribs, and in your abdomen. And as much as possible, there should be no movement in your shoulders. And your belly should expand out like a balloon on the in-breath and contract on the out-breath. Now begin to mentally count the duration of your inhalation and your exhalation, letting them be approximately equal in length. Ideally, you want to aim to slow down your breathing, so each breath is 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out. But to start with, it's just important that you find a rhythm that feels slow and natural to you. And after breathing like this in a few minutes, you'll gently take your attention to your heart area, and then you begin to feel appreciation or gratitude in your heart. So it's a lovely, kind way of learning to breathe. So that's balanced breathing. And I certainly can give you more information. I've got a worksheet that I can give you at the end of this if you would like it. And then there's another one called your 5 senses. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of what your 5 senses are. And on the next slide, I'll be able to take you through those. Another one is anchoring. And for those of you who know me a little bit, you'll know that I have done a little bit of work with acceptance and commitment therapy. And anchoring is definitely one of the techniques that's used a lot in cognitive behavioural therapies. And it's just, I'll talk to you a little bit further about that too. It's another very simple way of getting yourself into the present moment. And then 5-finger breathing, which I think is another beautiful one. So here's the 5 senses. So what you're doing here is you're using your senses to get into the present. Now, what you do is you look around and you notice 5 things that you can see around you. So obviously you're not going to do any of this with your eyes shut because you need to be able to see. And then you notice 4 things that you can hear around you. And for me, if I was doing it at home, it might be something like the birds outside or a car driving past or the dog barking, or I think I just heard my husband yell downstairs. Then for the 3rd one there is notice 3 things that you can feel. And that might be, for me, I can feel my feet on the floor, I can feel my bottom on the chair, and I can feel my elbows on the table. And then smelling. So notice 2 things that you can smell, and often this one's a little bit harder because we don't always have a lot of really obvious smells in our close environment. And lastly, notice 1 thing that you can taste. And that might be just what you've had to eat or, the last thing you had to drink. And again, it can be a little bit difficult, but that's how you get to use your 5 senses. And it switches you from the sympathetic nervous system into that parasympathetic nervous system. Now, anchoring. Now, I use a technique for this called stop, which when you catch yourself really thinking and worrying, the way to do that is to use this acronym called STOP. So the S stands for stop whatever you're doing, just pause momentarily. You might even like to see a stop sign in your mind, and you may even smile as you recognize you are taking back the reins of control from your thinking. If you get this far, you're more than halfway there, and you need to do it over and over to break the old pathway and create a new one. The T stands for take a breath. So reconnect with your breath, and the breath is an anchor to the present moment. And then O is observe, notice what's happening inside of you, and perhaps what's happening outside of you. And then P is proceed. Continue with what you're doing. Just a simple acronym, and something that, because you can sort of put that stop sign in front of your head, that it'll give you that trigger or that key to remember to do it when your thoughts or emotions are taking you away. Now, the 5-finger breathing technique is something that I find really useful with children. Maybe one that I have to do with you actually looking at me, because I don't think I can talk you through it. But really, it's what we do is we breathe with our finger following up around, tracing around our hands. And so you breathe in to go to the top of the thumb, breathe out. Then you breathe in to go to the top of the index finger, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And it's just a really mindful way of breathing and teaching you to breathe slowly. And you really can't concentrate on anything else when you're doing it. And it works very well with children if you're trying to calm them down as well. Okay, so mindfulness. So noticing when time traveling, predicting or mind reading, and then come back. So what that's really showing you is that notice when your thoughts are taking you away. I like to talk to my clients about using the 3 N's, which are notice your thoughts, name them, and then neutralize them. The next step there is pause, become aware of what is happening in our body instead of getting lost in our reactive thoughts, emotions, and actions. And you can then instead relate differently to your experience and act rather than react. Because if you're acting, you're actually then coming from that logical, creative thinking part of your brain. And then lastly, that body scan, which helps you to re-establish contact with your body, to reconnect the conscious mind to the feeling states of the body, to make you feel more relaxed and more at home in our bodies. So when you came up with those barriers, and these are some of the attitudes that might help you to overcome those barriers that you came up with. Being non-judgmental, not expecting to climb Mount Everest on the first time you try and do a practice of mindfulness or meditation. So, non-judging of yourself or others, being patient, using a real beginner's mind with it, trusting the process that it will happen, that non-striving, acceptance, and that real letting go. And this morning I decided to I went and lay on my bed and did a body scan that I listened to on YouTube. And I just felt like I really wanted to do a body scan. I love doing body scans. And I have to do it guided. I occasionally try and do it with myself, but I get a little bit distracted. So I find by listening to a body scan that I can really relax and really get right back in tune with my body. I'm going to take you through one at the end. So as I said, there's those different methods, the focused attention, which is like the 5-finger method. Coming into your senses is another one that focuses your attention. And then focusing on your breath, which is counting your breaths. And another way to do it is to count 10 breaths in and out. So I do it by going 1, 2, so counting 1 in and 2 out. And then when I get to 10, come back to start at 1 again. And that is a way that I use if I'm doing a unguided meditation, like if I'm not using one of the apps that I use, then I'll often just set my timer for 10 or 15 minutes on my watch, and I'll do my counting, and it seems to be enough to actually keep me centered. Sometimes I'll catch myself and I've gone up to 15 or 16 and I'll go, oh, and then I just come back and start again. And just noticing when your mind goes somewhere else and then bringing it back to the breath. And then that open monitoring is a body scan. So I thought now that I would take you through a body scan. So I'm just going to stop sharing.